AM 1460, the new WXBR. Peter Czymbor, Mike Pava here with you on a Friday morning. You're listening to the Metro South Morning Show, PM in the AM. Joining me now in studio is the managing editor for The Enterprise, joining us for the very first time at the new 250 Belmont Street studios here at the new WXBR. It's Steve Damish. Steve, good morning.
Peter, nice digs, nice studio, and thank you for having me on this nice day.
You used to be our neighbor at 60 Main Street as The Enterprise and WXBR, formerly WBET, were the two main tenants of that particular building for several years now. We're both gone. We're both split in different directions.
For decades, we were downstairs and you were upstairs, and the paper and the station were owned by the same family, but now we're at, like yourselves, we've moved, and we're at 1324 Belmont Street behind Sullivan Tire on the west end of the city.
So we're splintered in different directions. Media has really changed a lot since those days. I remember walking down to a bustling newsroom and heading to the soda and snack machines that were located towards the back of the newsroom. And gradually, it looked like our staff diminished at WBET, the Enterprise staff diminished a little bit, and now I think both terrestrial radio and print media are finding ways to adapt to the current market, with the Internet taking over a lot.
Well, as readers and listeners can tell, Peter, the key staff remained. You and I are still around, which is good. The media is changing and it's evolving, but the role remains the same. Is to we try to hold a mirror over the region and reflect the important happenings locally. So our mission has changed. Different staff, different day, different mediums, but the same mission.
And you said the key word locally. The only place people are going to get local news is places like the Enterprise and WXBR. So there'll always be a place for local newspapers and local radio, in my opinion, despite how often the medium changed to things more digital.
Yeah, people forget, Peter, it's a good point. We have, a drop in print circulation. No doubt we are at historic lows, but we have record readership. The Enterprise is part of Gatehouse Media, which is, the largest media company in New England currently, with the most readers and viewers every day. We have about 2 million viewers and readers every day of Gatehouse produced material. But the Enterprise, we have tens of thousands of views and hits on the web, enterprisenews.com every day, and we still have a very healthy, strong print circulation. So the hunger for local news is there. It's never gone away. It's grown, and I think the people we serve and the people you serve on the radio station are well served by what we do.
Once again, we're chatting with managing editor of The Enterprise, Steve Damish, here on AM 1460, the new WXBR. So interest in readership at an all-time high. However, people are consuming their information in different ways, basically.
Correct. Our website is the main way people receive news. EnterpriseNews.com drives our readership, and we approach it differently, Peter. Both mediums, print and web. Web is the shorter, quicker news story, and the print paper has evolved into the reason behind that news story. So we get the news out and in the web, and we try to get it out quickly and efficiently. And in the print, we try to follow up on that crash or that crime or that incident and explain in print in a longer fashion the reasons behind it.
One of my favorite parts of the Enterprise growing up, which I read almost every day growing up, I think since the time I was actually an Enterprise paper boy at one point. It's funny, to this day, I still remember who liked their newspapers and the hooks, who liked an elastic around their paper, because people would put their little notes in and whatnot when they got their paper delivered to their home. Arnold Greenblatt, if you didn't put it in the hooks, his wife was always a little upset. So to this day, Miss Greenblatt, I know. You put that paper in the hooks. But one of my favorite parts of the Enterprise that I would read every day was the letters to the editor. I have to assume at this point, letters to the editor, probably not as much as they once were, but subsequently you guys have comments online which kind of take place of that, so you can see what people are reacting to your stories.
True enough, and it's a very topical item, Peter, because we've recently changed in a dramatic fashion.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, how we take comments. That was... Comments and opinion anonymous comments has been the mainstay for a newspaper website since most began, 10 years thereabouts ago. We all took comments on the web anonymously. That was fraught with some danger. People didn't like it. Some people didn't like it. Newspapers are evolving now to where you can no longer comment anonymously. You can if you're clever enough, but we do require more verification, more identification, more information to make sure that there is a thoughtful person who is accountable behind the comment. So we no longer take anonymous comments by crazily named anonymous people. You need to log in through a new system we have online. It's starting off slow, and we don't have near the comments we used to have. However, it is gaining quickly, and we're happy to see people logging on, identifying themselves, registering with the enterprise, and joining the comments. And soon we'll have more moderated comments and more involvement online with reporters and editors like myself who will start engaging the commenters.
Yeah, I was going to say that probably the theory about making the commenters have to register with their names as opposed to being anonymous is that you'll get more intelligent dialogue amongst the commenters. The drawback of that is in the short term, you're going to get less comments, but within time, hopefully enough intelligent people register and log in and are willing to give their opinions on subjects in a more intelligent manner, whereas if they're anonymous, they can just spew some hate-filled nonsense.
Right. It's a tricky balancing act because a news site is after readership, and commenters are readers, and a news site is also not just after readers, but we are after engaged readers. Commenters are engaged readers. The worst thing you want to do is have a website that has 10,000 hits a day or a half a day. We have much more than that, but where people come on for 5 seconds. You want to show advertisers and readers and marketing people, they come onto your website for 10 minutes. Commenters come on and stay and engage. So it's a tough balancing act as far as making them more committed and more responsible for identifying themselves and registering. So we don't have the same number of commenters, but we think we're going to have more engaged commenters as we go forward, and they'll stick around and take part in longer conversations.
Once again, we're chatting with Steve Damish, managing editor of the Enterprise. I have to imagine that there is not much of a separation between the enterprisenews.com website and the Enterprise newspaper. It's all one and the same. It's all the same people working on the same two mediums.
That's correct. We do have some editors who work online mostly and don't do much with the print. I oversee both. The reporters contribute to both. The photographers contribute to both. The big difference might be in reader contribution. We have much more reader-provided material online than we do in print. We have some in both, but the web really exists in many ways to make it easier for the reader to get their information out to the public, and we're sort of a doorway for that. So we do take much more reader-provided material than we normally would, but same staff, same photogs, same reporters, same editors overseeing the same content.
One thing you mentioned a few moments ago that I found interesting is that in talking about this new registration for commenters on enterprisenews.com, some of your reporters and columnists are going to become more interactive with the readers. What's your thoughts on columnists and reporters opining on the response to their articles on enterprisenews.com? Because we chatted with one of our frequent guests on the program a few weeks ago, Dave Wheeler, who has an article or a column that appears each and every Monday in the Enterprise and enterprisenews.com. And he says that he's found himself engaged in some discussions with some people who have commented on his columns and his ideas in the past. I wonder your thoughts.
It's tricky. We love Dave. He writes a Monday column for us, both print and online, and very well received. Dave is the principal for Southeastern Regional, and one of a couple principals who write columns for the Enterprise. I think the reporters and the editors, once we start doing this, Peter, will have to be very careful. We have to avoid giving our views to a point where they might, affect the news coverage.
And there's a difference between reporters and columnists, we should mention as well.
Right. And we'll likely have editors first join the discussions, and some editors already have at Gatehouse Media. We'll have editors join the discussions, and their job is really to keep the discussion moving forward, not get bogged down in any kind of needless debate or innuendo or insinuation or attacks. That would be the main job of the editor who joins a conversation. And I'm looking forward to joining those conversations myself. And my job will be to, once again, keep it going forward, keep it constructive, keep it positive, and try to make some decisions and make some thoughtful ideas. The reporters, to a lesser extent, will be online in that fashion, and they'll be there more to discuss what they've reported on and the facts of a story, and maybe how they went about getting those facts. And reporters have a fascinating job. What they do, going to murder scenes and fires and City Hall, and they have a view of the world that most people don't have. Courtrooms, police stations. And I'm looking forward to having them share more, online especially, with readers, their vantage point, which is quite unique.
Once again, we're chatting with Steve Damish, managing editor for the Enterprise here on AM 1460, the new WXBR. Steve, you yourself, some of your reporters have Twitter handles at this point, which are public. You guys publish in the Enterprise and on enterprisenews.com. How has social media and Twitter in particular changed coverage of local news stories and reporting in general since it's become quite popular in the last few years?
Well, it's turned the news cycle into a 24/7 news cycle. It used to be, the morning deadline. We had the morning deadline and the afternoon paper, and we watched what the Boston dailies did and what the Southeastern Mass dailies did and responded in kind, or tried to find the story itself first and report it first and let them respond to us. But now it's you need to be ever vigilant. It's 24/7, and Twitter is more in the Twitter feeds that we are part of. It's more of a almost has become a news service more than a communication service. Twitter is an incredible news tool, as you know yourself, Peter. People go there to find news and to share news, and we have a lot of people who follow scanners who post news of what they hear on the scanner. So Twitter has, and Facebook, but especially Twitter, has created this 24/7 news report that is nonstop and that we have to be watching and to be joining and to be part of. Otherwise, we'll be left on the curbside.
In many instances, I think that Twitter is best utilized almost like an elementary school student would use a encyclopedia for a book report. Not the kids you really use encyclopedias anymore. I'm dating myself here. But use the encyclopedia as, not a book report, but let's say like a world report or something. Use the encyclopedia as your first reference and find more references on top of that. Now with Twitter, you see something. Don't just take it at face value. Dig a little deeper into it, because the truth of the matter is there is this faction of journalists growing up now that want to be first, as opposed to getting all the facts right and being correct. Have you experienced this, or have you seen this?
Definitely, and people need to be careful when they're on Twitter looking for news. You need to always identify your source, and, not to pat ourselves on the back, there is no source like your local newspaper staff. People who live, work, know the region, know the history of the region, know what matters and what is news. And like yourself, Peter Czymbor, another great news source. No one knows the news like we do for the Brockton region, and what matters, why it matters, and why it's important. And if you're looking for news out of the Brockton region, Twitter can be a great place to look. It can be a terrible place to look. It's, once again, the good point you made is it's a starting point, not a finishing point. I go there to start my day and during the day just to watch for stories that we should be reporting on. But it's, they're short, quick blurbs. They'll give you the crash news about a certain road, or they'll tell you about a fire at a certain home, but they won't say, why it happened or what the outcome was or who that person in the fire was, who was the person in the traffic accident who came by and helped pull the driver out of the car. That's where we come in. Twitter is merely a starting point, but it's a tremendous tool as far as just learning about what's happening in the region. Because of the people who follow scanners, you can go online and listen to any scanner from local towns, and then you can create a Twitter account and post what you hear. And there are several people who do that. Some do it quite well. Some don't do it quite well. So it can be a tremendous tool if you know how to use it the proper way.
Once again, you're listening to AM 1460, the new WXBR. You're listening to the Metro South Morning Show, PM in the AM. Peter Czymbor and Mike Pava here with you on this Friday morning. Joined in studio by Enterprise Managing Editor Steve Damish. Steve, we're going to break for a local news update courtesy of Mike Pava in the WXBR newsroom. When we return, you're going to stick around?
I am. Thank you.
That's Steve Damish, Managing Editor of the Enterprise, joining us here on AM 1460, the new WXBR. We'll step aside for a quick breather. Mike Pava brings us a news update. Stick with us.
You are listening to the Metro South Morning Show on the new WXBR 1460.
AM 1460, the new WXBR. Peter Czymbor, Mike Pava here with you on a Friday morning here on AM 1460, the new WXBR. Remember, our open house being held tomorrow, 250 Belmont Street, grand opening of the brand new WXBR studios. We hope to see you there. And joining us in studio now is Enterprise Managing Editor Steve Damish. Steve, we hope to see you there as well.
I hope to be here, Peter. I will make every effort. As you know, we moved ourselves recently. 5 years ago, the Enterprise moved from 60 Main Street to 1324 Belmont, and we still have people to this day going to 60 Main Street. So I think your idea of an open house grand opening is great. We never had one. I think it's time we do, and we need to promote more the fact that we are now at 1324 Belmont in a nice Mike Giuliano building and state-of-the-art newsroom, and people are invited to come there as well.
We both went from Main Street to Belmont Street, but different parts of Belmont
Exactly.
Street, the Enterprise and WXBR. And I think the Enterprise sign and the WBET and WCAV signs are still in that building, so it's only fitting that people still think it's there, and we haven't been there for, in our case, about 8-9 months, and for you guys, a few years at this point.
Right, and you can't miss them if you're riding the train, which I do quite often to Boston. You look out to the left and you see the radio signs and the Enterprise signs, and you think it looks new, it looks clean. It looks like it's occupied, but it is not.
Once again, we're chatting with Enterprise Managing Editor Steve Damish here on AM 1460, the new WXBR. Steve, in the first portion of you being on a program today, I wanted to talk to you about a lot of the mechanics of how a local newspaper works and the changes and trends within reporting. You did a good job of explaining a lot of that. I want to talk to you about some local news stories which are very pertinent to the Enterprise as of late. Let's start off with the Enterprise News. Gatehouse Media, your parent company, having somewhat of a legal battle won in order for information to be released in the Aaron Hernandez case a few weeks ago. Tell us what exactly happened, what Gatehouse Media did, and why more information about that case was released to us as a result of what you guys did.
Well, thank you for bringing that up. And, in fact, there is more information being released today out of the Attleboro Court that will be in tomorrow's Enterprise. This is a good example of a local news organization and the power that we wield if we wield it, smartly and intelligently. There was information in the Hernandez case involving search warrant affidavits and arrest warrant affidavits. These are testimonies by the legal officials that are needed before you can arrest or somebody or search their property. Those were impounded, kept away from public, and Gatehouse Media, our attorneys, argued they should not be. And we won that case several days ago, and several records were released, and more are being released today, as a matter of fact. These are records that say, what happened at the Hernandez household, how he reacted when the state police came to his front door, and detailed affidavits that give you a look into what exactly is happening over there in that case. So the Gatehouse is proud that we, had the foresight and the vision to take this, battle on. You don't always win, and sometimes they can go on for a while, for weeks. But the judge saw the legal reasoning, and these are, in the end, public records. They can be impounded sometimes temporarily, but the public interest is there, and they were released to us. And like I said, Peter, there are more records, a bunch more, hundreds of more pages being released as we speak that will be examined and written about today and tomorrow in various Gatehouse newspapers.
Just a few weeks ago, in excess of 150 pages of previously unreleased information about the Aaron Hernandez arrest and the warrants became available, I believe, at enterprisenews.com. You guys post the link, and I found it fascinating to read that 150 pages of information. At what point, now, in your coverage of the Aaron Hernandez story, for example, it's a major news story. It was, at one time, a major sports story. Do you guys work in conjunction with, say, the sports department? Glenn Farley does a fantastic job of covering the New England Patriots, one of the best beat writers of the New England Patriots in the entire region of New England. I'm surprised he doesn't do more TV. I tell him that all the time. You got to get on Comcast Sportsnet or something because your stuff is great.
I agree.
We're going to have him on our show, so we know the deal.
Hey, we finally got him tweeting, so we're working on him.
But at what point does a sports story become a news story, and what exactly is the working relationship between the two departments on a story of, say, the Aaron Hernandez?
That's a good question. That's a tough question. I have a view in my newsroom that everybody who writes for the Enterprise is a news reporter. And whether the news or originates in the sports realm or elsewhere, we're all covering news of some sort. The Aaron Hernandez case is more of a hard news story because it involves some serious charges. That's a story that normally depends on the setup of the newspaper, but either a news and or a sports reporter can work on it together. That's been more of a news story for us. It's a tricky balancing act for a reporter like Glenn Farley, who has to be at the field meeting with these players, the Patriots and their coaches, daily, especially during the season. So does he cover a story that might, put him in a tough position to cover the team in the intimate fashion we want him to? Maybe not. We leave that to the news department because we want him to have that professional detachment from the season, from the team, that lets him, maintain the intimate connections he has in the locker room. The news reporters who are covering the story right now, the Hernandez case for us, they aren't in the locker room like Glenn is and will be covering the team in the season. So there is a difference in the separation. However, if the story is big enough, all hands on board. We call them all in, and Glenn pitches in by writing columns and writing about how it affects the team. The news side writes about the court case and the documents and the fight to get the documents, and we sort of decide which story goes where based on how it reads. Glenn's column on the Patriots and how this might affect the season could go on page 1 as a sidebar to court documents released after legal battle. With the legal battle story could be a sidebar to Glenn's column. So the packaging depends on how the stories are written and how they come together. But in the end, we're all covering the same story from different vantage points.
There you go. The legal goes to the news. Glenn has to talk about how it affects the team. I'm sure he was right on top of the Patriots.
Exactly.
Releasing Aaron Hernandez seemingly within an hour to 90 minutes of him being arrested for the murder charges. And then you guys will be in the courtroom, I'm sure, once this does go to trial and following it up until it does go to trial. Exactly.
And it's a great example of, Peter, of the importance of a local news organization, because Gatehouse Media is based out of New York, but because we have local editors who know the landscape, know the court landscape, and know what matters as far as news goes, we know that we need to go after those records and get them for our readers. So people need to realize that it wasn't the Boston papers who did this. It was the local smaller papers, part of Gatehouse Media, who went after these Hernandez documents, got them and reported them to you as part of our service and commitment to local readers. It's a local story.
And outside of the Enterprise, what other local newspapers does Gatehouse Media own?
300. Locally, we own the bigger ones, Patriot Ledger, Taunton Gazette, Fall River Herald. Those are the bigger dailies locally. And we have weeklies in about every single local town. And if you're in a online and want to find out what paper we cover what paper covers your town, you can simply go to wickedlocal.com. We own that domain name, wickedlocal.com. And if you want to put a / your hometown afterwards, if we have a site in your town, that means we have a paper in your town. That means you can find news at that site. So wickedlocal.com / Bridgewater is an active site. wickedlocal.com / Rainham is an active site. We have papers in those towns, and the material in the papers and the back and forth and the news from that town is all posted at that site. But a good starting point is wickedlocal.com, which Gatehouse owns.
How much synergy is there between newspapers, say, like the Enterprise, the Patriot Ledger in Quincy, and the newspapers you mentioned in Taunton and Fall River?
Great question and a great topic, actually, because people were worried that, will the Enterprise become too much like the Patriot Ledger because we're sharing resources, sharing stories, and we have the same editor. The Taunton Gazette, would the Taunton Gazette be too much like the Enterprise because of the same situation? We share stories, we have overlapped towns and communities, and we have similar news staffs. Will these papers lose their identities? No. And what has happened is we've been able to, combine resources to do some bigger stories. And the perfect example is the Hernandez case. Back in the day, the Enterprise by itself or the Taunton Gazette by itself might not go after those Hernandez documents. Tremendous legal fees. It's a big commitment of resources, not just in the attorneys, but we need to have a reporter or two or three sit by the courthouse all day long waiting for the decision and then waiting for those documents by the hundreds to be released. It's hours and hours of time. And then that reporter has to read those documents, sometimes redacted, blacked out documents, trying to find the salient information. Tremendous commitment of time and resources, Peter, that maybe as a separate individual newspaper in the past you might not make. Nowadays, much easier to make, because back in the day, if I had to send a reporter to a court to wait for this decision / documents / whatever for 10 hours or 3 days, and pay a lawyer and pay for the overtime and whatever that's required to get that information, you might think twice. Nowadays, maybe there's a reporter in Taunton who's available to go to the courthouse where the Enterprise doesn't have a spare reporter, and we have an attorney who represents all the papers together. So we have the power of numbers and the power of a combined readership to really make it work. And in a perfect case is the Hernandez impounded documents. As a team, as a Gatehouse Corporation, we were much more able to get the paperwork. Also, when the judge sees the complaint, if it's Gatehouse Media and 300 newspapers behind it, as opposed to one newspaper, there's more weight. So it's a tremendous benefit. There's a tremendous benefit for newspapers nowadays to share resources, and Gatehouse Media, I'm happy to say, is doing just that and making it work in a positive way for readers.
We're chatting with Steve Damish, managing editor of the Enterprise here on AM 1460, the new WXBR. Steve, in your role of managing editor, how much say do you have in the layout of a newspaper, and in particular what goes on the cover?
Big say in what goes on the cover, much less in the layout. The way the Enterprise is set up nowadays, we are the newsroom of the future, Peter. In our Belmont Street office, it's just the 6 reporters, 2 editors, 2 photogs, 2 newsroom writers, and an intern. No copy editors. All the layout is done at the Patriot Ledger newsroom where the copy desk for the Enterprise is situated. So we are on the content side of the operation. We are responsible for generating most, if not all, of the local content for the enterprise each day. We decide where it goes and what goes on page one and what goes on the local cover and what have you. And the copy desk puts material where we tell them to. The page layout, in the end, is their call. But like today, we had a nice story about Roger Pitt-Perrin, a boxing legend in the region, and an event they're having for him next week. And on yesterday's list of stories for today's paper, I said must page one package per me. So I determine in the end what goes on page one and what goes where in the newspaper.
I asked specifically about the cover because, as you know, there has been some controversy about a major publication's cover in the past week. Rolling Stone magazine put a photo of Boston Marathon bomber suspect number 2, young Jahar Tsarnaev, on their cover of Rolling Stone magazine, a publication where being on the cover is usually a privilege for entertainers and rock stars. They put a man who is being charged with killing at least 4 people and injuring hundreds of others on their paper. People in the area are outraged. First off, your thoughts on them putting him on the cover in the fashion in which they did, the outrage which ensued, many of which came from people south of Boston where you guys adhere to with your newspaper, and is that a decision that you think should be discussed in such negative terms as it has been, or is it just a decision that they have to stick with as editors?
It's a tough call. And I originally, we heard about that yesterday, and we discussed it in the Enterprise newsroom as far as doing a local reaction, and I said, nah, and let's not go there right now. We have so much happening locally. But we were overwhelmed by the local anger and outrage.
I thought it was fake when I first saw it.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it.
I saw it on Facebook, and I thought someone had put together a fake Rolling Stone cover and posted it on their Facebook to be ha-ha funny. I couldn't believe it was real.
Right. I thought it was a young Bob Dylan, frankly. And when I looked at it very quickly.
I could see that, actually.
Sure,
yeah.
I thought it was Bob Dylan. They were doing some earlier
I heard
piece.
Jim Morrison earlier. Bob Dylan makes as much sense to me.
Sure, I thought it was that. It's a tricky call. I'm very curious to see, and I hope somebody follows up with the Rolling Stone sales numbers from this edition next month to see how it did, because it was pulled. I didn't want to do a story on this, Peter, because I didn't have the staff yesterday to follow this. I had a lot going on. Major story out of Middleborough, a lot happening in Brockton. So localizing this Rolling Stone cover was not really an option until the readers began just, venting in my direction about this story. They couldn't believe it. When I thought about it, bad call in the first place not to localize, because so many people were touched locally and directly by that incident that they were bound to be touched by this cover. And I didn't make that connection initially, but we had dozens of people either hurt, who narrowly missed the bombing, who treated people who were injured after the bombing, dozens of family members who were affected by that incident. They were bound to be affected by the cover. I don't like it. I'm not surprised at the reaction. I was surprised at the intensity of the reaction. People weren't just angry. They were, demanding stores locally, and we have a list of stores who dumped it, remove it from their counter. They were mad at people who walked out, carrying a copy of the edition. Amazing reaction, but when you think about it and the impact the incident had on this region, it hit close to home.
And one thing that I found interesting about the editors of Rolling Stone's reaction to the outrage about the cover was they put a little disclaimer at the beginning of the article, which is available in its entirety online at rollingstone.com. And in their little disclaimer, they said their hearts go out to the victims of the Boston Marathon bombing, but this is an important story for them to cover for their readers. And I thought they completely ignored what the controversy was. The controversy was over the cover and not the article. People were upset about the cover before the article was even available to them, and I thought that was rather insulting of the editors to completely omit what the actual issue was in their response to the outrage.
I agree. We have to be so careful with every picture we publish, and they as well. But I'll tell you an example. we have a funny line in the newsroom to be careful of riding lawnmower pictures. Every time we publish, and we don't anymore, we try not to, a person on a ride-on mower carrying a child, we get inundated with phone calls. Why are you so irresponsible for running a picture of a person on a ride-on mower with a kid on top? That kid could fall and be injured by the blade. It's happened to my nephew. It's happened to my cousin. Blah, blah, blah. It goes on and on and on. Pictures have tremendous impact. And just seeing that picture on that magazine, we saw the impact it had. But every picture we choose, especially for page one, I tell you, when people say a newspaper or a magazine doesn't have quite the weight it used to have because of the internet onslaught, it still does. So every picture we have on page one, we have to really think about and be very careful how we approach it, because we hear from people who feel it when it's wrong.
So if you were editor-in-chief or managing editor of Rolling Stone magazine, I take it that would not be the photo you would have put on the...
I would not have, but once again, I doubt he's down here. He's most likely in New York. Knowing, every decision I make as far as news coverage is made based on my knowledge of this region and the people we serve. And believe me, I know several people who were right there when this went off, and I would not have had that as the cover. Of course, people might ask, but the picture itself of the cover is on page one of today's Enterprise. And it is, but that's more news coverage, and it's a smaller version, and it's needed in the context of writing that story.
Yeah, being on the front page of a newspaper, I think, is different from being on the front page of Rolling Stone magazine.
Definitely.
Being on the front page of Rolling Stone magazine, you're a rock star, you're an entertainer. Being on the front page of a newspaper, your notoriety has been gained from something in the news, whether it's good or bad, where traditionally, I think if you're on the cover of Rolling Stone, you had to earn that spot. And I think people are saying, what did Jahar Sarnaev do to earn this spot on Rolling Stone? You mentioned something moments ago that I found very interesting. You want to know, about a month from now, how did this affect sales of this particular issue of Rolling Stone? Well, here's something else to consider. Earlier this week, they posted that article in its entirety at rollingstone.com. So me, for example, I'm not going to go buy this article. However, did I read the article in its entirety at rollingstone.com and click those 5 pages to get to the next part of the story? I absolutely did so, even though this coming off of store shelves might seem like a win in morality for the locals. In the long run, Rolling Stone still wins because we're going to read it, we're going to give them their clicks, and their advertisers online are going to be just as happy as the advertisers inside their actual print edition.
But you know what? To this day, most print publications still, I would guess 80 to 90% of their profit comes from magazine sales. That much. Print publications to this day make the majority of their money through print sales, through magazine sales and newspaper sales. That is still the lion's share of the profit. The web is still a small player as far as making money. It's changing and quickly, but I would bet if people refuse to buy that issue, Rolling Stone really feels it in their pocketbook this month.
And for the record, we'll mention this as we did on the program yesterday. At the time we conduct this interview, no response yet from the publicist or the writer of that article on rollingstone.com to appear on our radio program because we wanted to give them an opportunity to discuss the article, which really isn't even being discussed. People are talking about the cover so much. You're listening to AM 1460, the new WXBR. Peter Czymbor here with Enterprise Managing Editor Steve Damish. Steve, can you stick around for another segment?
Sure thing, Peter.
Thank you so much. Stick with us here on the Metro South Morning Show, PM in the AM. We'll step aside for a quick break. Mike Pava brings us a local news update after this. AM 1460, the new WXBR. Peter Czymbor and Mike Pava here with you on a Friday morning. You're listening to the Metro South Morning Show, PM in the AM. Remember, You can follow us on Twitter at PM in the AM Boston. Like us on Facebook, PM in the AM, the Metro South Morning Show. And archived interviews and segments from this program often appear at youtube.com/PM in the AM Boston. So we urge you to check us out in all facets of social media. And we hope to meet you tomorrow at the grand opening of WXBR's new studios at 250 Belmont Street in Brockton. There'll be free food, beverages, entertainment. Come meet myself, Mike Pava, Ron Van Dam, Tramita Martin, owners and managers of the station. I even hear the Democratic Cowboy is going to be there.
Wow.
So you can see him in person, the man you've heard on the radio, venting about everything for the past X amount of years here on WXBR. We're joined in studio right now by managing editor for the Enterprise, Steve Damish. You're familiar with the Democratic Cowboy, right? That guy's called in for years. Has he written to you as well?
I know him personally. If you have not met him, you need to. He's one of the nicest guys you ever meet. I love the Cowboy. Great guy.
Democratic Cowboy is going to give you a shout-out in the 60 seconds later on this morning. I can tell. Once again, we're chatting with Steve Damish, managing editor for the Enterprise here on AM 1460, the new WXBR. Prior to the last news break, we were talking about the Rolling Stone cover with Jahar Sarnaev. Let's talk about the trial with Jahar Sarnaev. He recently was seen in public for the first time since those grainy surveillance pictures came about of him allegedly planting the bombs at the Boston Marathon. And we did get to see a little glimpse of him as he was captured in the boat in that guy's backyard in Watertown a few days later as well. But at his arraignment recently for what will ultimately be the trial for Jahar Sarnaev, interesting point the judge made. The judge asked both the prosecutors and the defense team, if at all possible, not to seal any documents in relation to this case. They want the information to be out there and consumed by the public. As a managing editor of a newspaper, that's got to make you happy.
Very happy. One thing that's been unsettling for the longest time and most recently has been the public officials who do not want to release information. We've had the darndest time, and it's gotten a lot worse in the last few years, getting information from courts, from city halls, from town offices, and that's bad news. Whenever it's great news about what you just said about that judge, and we've had good luck with most judges locally, but whenever a town official or a city official or anybody in any power that be in the public denies information to a newspaper, they are denying information to the public. And we find that unacceptable, and it happens a lot. It's happened a lot in Brockton. It's happened a lot in West Bridgewater.
Is there any cases that just jump out in your mind right now that you wish there was more information readily available to you?
So many, I'm overwhelmed. There are several cases in West Bridgewater that involve settlements between former police officers and the town. And we've written about some, and we got one, we know of others, and they try to tell us that the settlement involves a privacy agreement reached between the former town employee and the town. But anytime there's public money exchanged as part of a settlement, all bets are off. It's public, and the public has a right to know exactly how every penny is spent. In the end, we win those debates by appealing to the state. But town officials know it takes months for the state to review the case and to issue a decision. And in the end, if the town official decides to withhold information and not release it, they don't face a huge penalty or any kind of fine. They face public scrutiny. So it's hard. It's hard getting information out of certain district attorneys' offices, out of certain courts, out of certain town offices. It's an ongoing struggle, and it's one of the most important missions we have as newspaper editors and reporters to always keep that information flowing and never stop asking for it.
We're chatting with Steve Damish, managing editor for the Enterprise here on AM 1460, the new WXBR. One thing the Enterprise has really been known for in recent years has been your coverage and your series on the drug culture and OCs in Brockton and in areas south of Boston. What changes in that culture have you seen as a result of the Enterprise's reporting a few years ago, which was just fantastic, the series you did?
Well, thank you. And we're trying to stay on top of it. A lot of great things have happened because of the reporting we started back in 2006. The Learn to Cope support group has grown is 5 times the size it was back then. Brockton has a recovery school. Brockton has a High Point treatment center. There are schools in the region have substance abuse officers who are more familiar with addiction and how to identify and treat it. But it's funny you mentioned Twitter. I tweeted yesterday. Now and then I do some scanner tweeting like others do, and I tweeted yesterday about how I kept hearing the quote potential overdose nonstop. If you sit by a scanner to this day and listen as I do, you hear throughout the day and mostly in the larger populations of Brockton, potential overdose, possible overdose, et cetera, nonstop. These drug overdoses are happening daily, and far too often. Narcan, this anti-overdose drug, has been saving lives, and thankfully, and that's another addition, by the way, that's happened since our series. Most you can get Narcan doses, inhalants, to help counter an overdose, and most EMTs have them available now, and now parents have them, and they can use them. But they are being used far too often. The epidemic, in my humble opinion, based on my contacts and my reporting, has not waned. It's as bad as it has been, and we are putting together another update on exactly how bad. But it is. We had a story 2 days ago or 3 days ago on the Enterprise page 1 about overdoses in Stoughton and Easton being way up. We had a story the day before that on a quote hot batch of heroin being found in the region, causing overdoses, very strong drugs. The epidemic is here, Peter. It's being answered, and more is being done, but there's a lot more to do, and the biggest thing that remains to do is the ongoing effort to remove the stigma of addiction so people who are caught up in that disease can get the help they need.
You mentioned the word disease. Still to this day, I know I'm going to take some heat for this. I know I'm going to take heat for it, so get your angry tweets ready. I still have a problem with it being called disease. You don't choose cancer, but you do choose to stick a needle in your arm or a pill in your mouth. I know I'm going to get heat for it.
Well, I'll tell you that the BU School of Public Health has proved otherwise. They've done
I disagree with them.
Well, fair enough. Dr. Rosenblum at the BU School of Public Health and formerly of the National Addiction Center in New York, they have conclusively, through brain scans, proven that there are pre-existing conditions that make someone more likely to become addicted. It doesn't matter what we think anymore because it's now classified as a disease. How many people does addiction kill versus cancer, and does one choose one over another? The argument can go on forever on that. But the new data that has been released in the last few years, and from one group was the BU School of Public Health, shows that people do not choose to become addicts. It is a pre-existing condition.
I guess the one thing we can all agree on is don't choose to do the drug to begin with.
Exactly, but even that, they have shown that it is now classified as a disease. So regardless of what we think, they've done the studies, they've done the brain scans, and it is now officially labeled a disease. Only in the last few years, and the people I've talked to quite a few addicts and families caught up in this, and I agree from my observation. I think it's for sure a disease, and the one thing that came across over and over and over again to me is that not one person caught up in this chose this. They made a mistake. How many mistakes have you made? We've all made mistakes. They've made mistakes that have led to something they never thought was possible. Never imagined them doing what they could do, but we make decisions every day to do certain things. They made decisions that for them allowed this disease to take hold.
And fair enough, and hopefully with the reporting that publication such as the Enterprise has done, it can prevent people from even starting this to begin with, knowing just how deadly addictive OCs can be. I mean, I've seen it in my own personal life. I've had family members, friends, I've seen it.
It's a tough topic, and I understand the stigma. I understand why people, question the disease factor. Very tough topic, but in the end, the way I look at it is we have a lot of young people dying that should not be dying. It's the leading cause of death for young adults in Massachusetts, more than anything else, more than car crashes, more than drunk driving, anything. It is death by opiate overdose is the leading cause of death for young people in Massachusetts. And in there's a span of 3 years where 5,000 some odd people died from overdose. Regardless of what it is, it has to be stopped.
Absolutely. I'm in that age, 25 years old, and you have to say to friends here and there when you hear something, "What are you, an idiot?"
Right.
Literally, you have to say the words, "What are you, an idiot?" and let them know how stupid it is before it gets out of control.
But it cascades. No one expects to take a pill one day and a month down the road be injecting a needle. No one ever thinks that's possible, but it happens, and it happens quickly.
And when can we expect the update on that in the Enterprise that you mentioned?
We do. I'm glad you asked. We just recently updated our Wasted Youth site on enterprisenews.com with many more stories, but we are doing a more look back at the last 10 years. And I'm going to be looking at the toll this epidemic has taken over the last 10-year period. It was about 10 years ago when OxyContin first became widely available in this region, roughly 10 years ago. And it really slammed Brockton High School, other schools in the region, and many communities. Really hit this region hard in the mid-2000s, 2004, 2005. And we're looking at that 10-year period now to see what damage has been done over that last decade of what people also agree is a legitimate epidemic.
You were interviewed for a special on the epidemic on OCs and drugs of that nature in this area for, I believe, the A&E Network.
Correct.
Shortly thereafter, the Wasted Youth series appeared in the Enterprise. It was a segment or a special narrated, I think, by Donnie Wahlberg, actually.
It was.
What were your thoughts on that special? Because I thought it was a little bit broad, and I thought they got some things wrong. Not exactly you got anything wrong, because I know they took a lot of information from your reporting and they interviewed you, but I thought they were a little broad, and I thought they got some things wrong.
It was broad, but the important thing is what they got the message out there that there were young people this was happening to. They did it fast, but it was very well received on the network. I know they.
Yeah, you were interviewed. It was on TV like a week later or something crazy, wasn't it?
Right, and it was on. It was done very fast, but they've repeated it 6 or 7 times since then because it was such a well received show. And I heard from people around the country by the hundreds who want someone in their region to write stories about that. So it was a well received documentary. It was a 1-hour documentary. It was called Heroin Hits Home, and was part of their intervention series. The big thing, Peter got the word out, and it showed the faces of these local younger adults who were caught up in this addiction. So it did accomplish what it set out to do, which is show a few local young addicts, give the numbers behind how many more there are, and tell people that it can happen to anybody. I got that message through at least.
In some of the subjects you guys focused in on the Wasted Youth series, any happy endings, any sad endings? What's the update on some of the characters you focused on, some of the people who were facing addiction?
Yeah, I won't name them because some of them, they've had life changes, some good stories. And that's one thing. Good question. I'm glad you asked that. One thing I want to do in the next segment we do is there are never any, quote, happy endings because addiction is a lifetime disease that you have to deal with. But the good news is there are some people I know and I've been interviewing and talking to who have been clean 5, 8, 10 years, leading great, healthy, happy lives. You can do it. These are younger kids who started out in their teens and now are in their 20s who have stayed clean. And they are great stories of recovery. And I want to have in addition, because we did focus on a lot of the tough part of it, the tragedy, which we had to. But I want to have an edition of the newspaper, if I'm able to soon, that focuses on recovery and how recovery is possible. And there are some great examples and great local subjects who have consented to being part of this and sharing their stories of recovery. Very encouraging, very hopeful that you can overcome and get clean and stay clean and live a happy life.
Once again, we're chatting with Steve Damish, managing editor of The Enterprise, here on AM 1460, the new WXBR. Earlier on in the program, Steve, I asked you about some of the mechanics and the trends in journalism and where it's going. I wanted to ask you about Patch.com. Enterprise and EnterpriseNews.com, a great source for local news, but there's been this other website, Patch.com, which has been setting up reporters in different towns and communities across the country, essentially trying to do something similar to what you do. What do you think of websites like that? And I believe in Patch.com, for example, they essentially have one person running the entire show. They have a reporter who's also the photographer, sometimes the editor, and they are wearing many, many hats. And I sometimes look at it and say, how can you do this and sustain a life after 6 months?
Right. That's a new wave of journalism. It's usually a younger, recent college grad who needs a job. They serve their purpose, but the way we look at it is test driving a car. You know, you're going to go enterprisenews.com or read the Enterprise, or go on wickedlocal.com and test drive our website and our news site, and then you look at, that site, and we know you'll be back because, you know, we have the breadth of coverage that is needed, and we have, once again, we have the unique situation of having a print backup to the web news sites. The model right now, Peter, that's working very well is we report the news on the web, get it out there, you know, write about the accident at Route 138 and 106 in a 3-inch web brief, tell people where the traffic is bogged up, tell them where to go, and tell them who was involved in the crash. Was it their neighbor, someone they know? And then the next day's paper, or maybe a day or two later, we do a piece looking at this intersection. Why so many accidents? Why yet another one? Why is the lighting not fixed? Why has the town or the state been unable or unwilling to do the work needed to make this a safer intersection? They can't do that. We can do that, and we have the place to do that. And that's the website, but also the print publications. We have a tremendous, you know, not just knowledge of the region and connection with the region, but we know we have this tremendous resource where we can not just cover it on the web, but we can explain it fully in print a day or 2 or 3 later, and get behind, you know, why that accident happened and what can be done to make it safer for you and your family.
And I mentioned Patch.com. I believe that their reporters receive a base pay, most of them, and then they receive additional money based on how many people click on the various pages within their website. Within Patch.com, there are other websites out there like Examiner.com, for example, where the reporters do not receive a base pay. They get paid strictly on how many times people click their website. It's usually penny clicks, but it almost entices them to be a little bit more provocative and sensationalistic in their reporting to get more people to click on their website so that they can earn themselves more money. There's got to be a conflict of interest there that bothers you as a guy that's a managing editor for a newspaper.
Definitely. It's the exact opposite way you want to run any kind of news organization. It should never be money-driven. And we have the advertising department and circulation distinctly separate from the newsroom for a reason, never connected. We remain separate entities, physically, mentally, and in any way possible. It's very important that you know who you are serving and why you are serving them. And in the end, the goal is to get information out to help people with their lives locally. Same with your WXBR. You have a mission here to get news out that people can use in their daily local lives. And I think AOL is sponsoring Patch. It's an AOL endeavor, and they're doing what a lot of organizations are doing. They're throwing stuff against the wall to see what sticks, see what model sticks. There's no secret in my field that everyone's trying to find the right news model. Between web and major websites like EnterpriseNews.com, the micro websites like wickedlocal.com/Brockton. and the print publication. We're all working on developing the new news model that would become the news model, news gathering model for the future. And we think Gatehouse has a bead on that and is doing it properly and gradually and never without thinking about and always including the reader, as you do, the listener.
Well, we've been chatting with Steve Damish, managing editor for the Enterprise here on AM 1460, the new WXBR. Steve, thank you so much for coming in studio today. We have to do this again sometime.
Peter, I wish you and WXBR well because I understand the value of a local radio station, same value as a local newspaper, vital to a city and a local region for reporting on important local news.
Well, thank you very much. That is Steve Damish, managing editor of the Enterprise, joining us here on AM 1460, the new WXBR. We are slightly overdue for a look at local news with Mike Pava, so we'll do that. Back with more of the Metro South Morning Show after this.